What are you prepared to do to pay for an extension of tax cuts for everybody?
This has been tax law in America for almost 10 years now, existing tax law. What the administration is proposing, and the majorities in the House and Senate, is to raise taxes on the top two brackets, which will affect 50% of small business income and impact 25% of the workforce. For example, if you look at the last quarter of last year, 84% of the jobs that were lost in small business. I think it is outrageous to suggest that raising taxes in the middle of a recession is a good idea.
Point taken. But Senator, my question is, how do you pay for an extension of tax cuts? Because if you're concerned, as Republicans say they are, about cutting spending and the deficit, you have to acknowledge that tax cuts are net paid for.
Well, what are you talking about? Pay for? This is existing tax policy. It's been in place for 10 years. What they're talking about is raising taxes, impacting 50% of small business income in the middle of what most Americans think is a recession. That is not a responsible thing to do, in my judgment.
But it's still borrowed money. Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, on this program August 1st said the following. Watch this.
Look, I'm very much in favor of tax cuts, but not with borrowed money. And the problem that we've gotten into in recent years is spending programs with borrowed money, tax cuts with borrowed money, and at the end of the day, that proves disastrous. And my view is I don't think we can play subtle policy here.
You don't agree with Republican leaders who say tax cuts pay for themselves?
They do not.
The CBO, Senator, this week made it very clear that the long-term picture for the economy, for the deficit, is very dark if you extend the Bush-era tax cuts without somehow paying for them.
Look, what we're talking about here is tax increases in the middle of a recession. We're going to have the third year in a row under this administration of an annual deficit of more than $1 trillion. That is not because we are taxing too little, David. It's because we're spending too much.
But, Senator, with respect, you're being unresponsive to a question, which is, are tax cuts paid for going forward, or is it borrowed money at a time when you and other Republican leaders say we must get serious about the deficit? It's a straightforward question.
Yeah, I know, and I gave you a straightforward answer. What we're talking about here is raising taxes in the middle of what most Americans think is a recession. That isn't going to produce more revenue. We've got a serious job loss problem in this country. They have primed the pump. They've borrowed money. They've spent money for the last year and a half. Unemployment is still almost at 10%. And now the job creators, the small businesses in this country, they're suggesting their taxes go up. Look, the president called in a bunch of small businessmen to the White House a few weeks ago, and he asked them why they weren't expanding. And their answer was, Mr. President, with all due respect, your agenda. Health care mandates, tax increases headed their way, more and more burdensome regulation. I mean, look at the new health care bill, for example. There's a provision in there that requires that small businesses send a 1099 form to the IRS for every vendor they do $600 worth of business with. That's just a massive amount of paperwork and problems.
But, Senator,
this administration is extraordinarily anti-business, and raising taxes in the middle of recession is not the way to go.
For a final time, I'll go back to my question, which is the extension of the tax cuts would cost $3.2 trillion. That's borrowed money. That adds to the deficit. Do you have a plan to pay for that extension?
You're talking about current tax policy. Why did it all of a sudden become something that me, quote, paid for?